Let me thank you all for coming. This is the first forum type thing that we're trying to do here at 600 Broad. In the coming months, we're going to try and get more of this sort of community, community discussions, participation, that sort of thing. This building belongs to you, the citizens of Augusta. So our job as managers of this asset is really to make it worthwhile to you, to make it an asset for you. So I picked this topic. I picked tonight's topic because it's one of my favorite topics personally. It's my hope that going forward, it will be people outside of our organization who are kind of pushing the topics and running the topics, because obviously that means less work for me. And it's also, it's not about me. So there's enough interest and there's enough things going on in Augusta that we can have the people in Augusta running their own forums. And this is as good a setting as any forum. So anyway, tonight's topic, one thing I am really excited about with the very small group of people here is that I'm not worried about there being any hecklers or problems. One of the things that I had to put in here is this rule. I used to teach, and there's this whole story about you can start making all these rules for your classroom, but at the end of the day, if you really want to just nail it, you just be a one-rule classroom, and that one rule is respect. So let me just get this out of the way, get this started. Is there anybody here who's not interested in better transit in Richmond County? No. Okay. So we all have the same goal. So the only time we're going to disagree is how to get there, right? How to get there, what's the priority, et cetera, right? So it's really important that when we're doing our little workshop tonight, if you find yourself disagreeing with somebody, just remember, you're both trying to get to the same place, okay? So that's our one rule. Our objective tonight, real simple. We're going to start with clarifying that statement that I just made. I want better bus service in Augusta. This is something that I hear a lot from folks all over town. I see it in the newspaper. I think it comes up at commission meetings. I'm sure you've heard it a lot. And that's great, but better transit is an outcome. So what we want to talk about is, what are the things that would have to happen to get to that outcome? Because it's all well and good for me to say, I want a better education. What does that mean? What classes do you need to take, et cetera, et cetera. Our second objective is understand and prioritize the values that shape our bus service. Oh, welcome. Come in. We're going to talk a little bit about values as opposed to priorities and how we set those values and the difference between, I'll give you a little story in a minute. It's called the plumber question, and we'll get there. Figure out how to measure something that will tell us how our system is doing something. So the other thing that we need to do in order for, anytime you want change, the first thing you have to do is know where you are. And in order to know where you are, you have to establish, some metrics, some criteria. Once you've got those metrics established, then you can say, this is the metric that we want to focus on, and this is where we want to see it move. And that's how and then you can figure out how to get there, right? But before we get that, let's start with, let's get that, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about what exactly it means. Hey, come on in. What exactly does it mean when we say we want better service? This is not meant to be a definitive list. These are just some of the things that I have personally heard people say. This is what I mean when I say I want better service. I want more destinations, or I want direct service, generally from my house to my destination, more frequent buses, more service hours. All of these things get tossed around, right? So the first thing we're going to do tonight is I'm going to actually, now that we have a couple more people, I'm going to ask you guys to split up into two groups, and you guys can stay there. And if I could just have you two move over to that table, and Annabelle, can you join them? And then we've got this group here. Both tables have these little sketch pads, right? I'm going to give both, I don't want to call you teams, but I'm going to give both groups 5 minutes to pick out things that you think would constitute better service. These can be any improvement at all. It can be anything. It can be flying buses. It could be electric buses. It could be more buses. It could be faster buses. Whatever. It could be a metro, a tram, right? Water taxi. I don't care. The point is, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I want you to write down on these little notebooks everything you can think of that would be an improvement to the bus system here in Augusta. And go.
You've written the bus.
Now, we're in a city where they actually have so I didn't want to overstep you, but
I want to go back and forth a little bit between these two groups and talk about what came up on your list of things that would be, what's an improvement to this system, or to any system really. So can we start over here?
Sure. So this group came up with a few things. I'm going to kind of start from the bottom of the list and work my way up. But one of the things we talked about that could be convenient for the rider experience if there was a mobile app that would be able to publish schedules and the timeliness of when buses are going to arrive. We talked about getting some cooperation from the city to make the bus stops more integrated into the infrastructure, kind of like some pull-in type of options. So cars behind the buses wouldn't have to wait while passengers are boarding. We also talked about extending the hours for shift workers, for folks that have other events or things that they need to do. And then we talked about the timeliness of the service. I guess there's some perceptions around the buses not exactly being timely according to schedules that are published. I don't know if that's a reality or if it's a perception, but something that was mentioned.
We were talking about accessibility, reaching more neighborhoods so more people have access to the lines, and by virtue of that, more access to educational opportunities, from our standpoint. Frequency, increasing, the runs at peak times. We looked at. There's some new holiday schedules. There's 3 new holiday schedules that are going to be put into place. And one suggestion was also, more buses. And probably tying in with some of the frequency, running more of those buses at peak times on those lines. And that was the observation.
Okay. All right. So let me just make sure I hit all of them. You saw I was writing them down on my little sticky notes, my huge sticky notes. I'm not going to do a separate one for frequency and more buses and extended service area, because it kind of sounds like it's all the same thing, right? When you're talking about more frequency, you're talking about more buses, right? And when you're talking about extending the service area, you're talking about more buses, right? So just want to make sure, these are some of the, I hope all of the ideas that were mentioned. If there's anything that was left out, please let me know now. But you're not obviously beholden to this later. It's just an exercise, right? So anyway, so these are a number of improvements. They're not all the improvements, certainly. But when we talk about change, especially in government and bureaucracy, it's helpful to prioritize your what you're going to change first and what's going to come later on in the list. And so the question is, how would you choose? How do you make this choice of which improvement to make first? Because obviously you're not going to make all of them at once. And in fact, making some of them in the right order might help you speed up the whole process. Some of them, there's a very quick return on investment. There's a very quick turnaround. Others, slower. But that gets into the next thing that I want to talk to you about, which is values. So I want to tell you the plumber question story. I did not invent this. There's a great guy, Jarrett Walker. He's an expert on transportation, and he talks about the plumber question, which is this. When you hire a plumber to come and fix your leaky sink, the plumber comes because you've hired a technical expert, right? The plumber comes, they look at your sink, and they turn around and they tell you, okay, there are 2 ways I can fix this sink. I can give you a $10 solution, which I have in the truck right now, but I'll be back next winter, right? Or I can sell you a $50 solution, but I have to order it, and I'll never come back. Once we fix the sink with that, it's fixed forever, right? A plumber is a technical expert. They know a lot about the system. It's not their job to decide what your values are. It's not their job to decide what's more important to you. Is it a fast solution? Is it a cheap solution? Is it a permanent solution? The technical expert's job is to offer you, hey, these are the things that you can do. Your job as a citizen is to determine your values and express your values when you're looking at the technical experts who offer you the solutions. So there are people within the government who are hired. Most of the people in the government are hired because of their qualifications. They are technical experts. So when they come to you and they say, hey, these are your options, right? It's important to understand they can really only act on your values if you tell them what your values are, right? So anyway, so we're going to do a little exercise now. I'm going to turn you guys loose again, where there are two primary values when we talk about public services, right? One of them is economic benefit, and the other one is social benefit. Mass transit is great because it encompasses both of them. Very often, the same trip will do both of these two things. So a very easy example would be somebody who can't drive a car for whatever reason, or can't afford to have a car, whatever. They take the bus, they get on the bus, they go to their job, right? This is a social benefit and an economic benefit. It's good for that person socially, it's good for our city economically, right? What I'm going to ask you to do is imagine a slightly different situation, only so that we can play these hypothetical games, okay? We're going to separate this into two different riders. The one rider can't get a car, can't drive. They get on the bus, and they go to the park. This is a purely social benefit. That service, that bus, is providing a purely social benefit. Again, this is all hypothetical, right? The other one is somebody who has a car, but chooses to ride the bus to get to their job. This one is not a social benefit, it's a purely economic benefit. If I made you choose, if I forced everybody in here to choose which one of these two buses are we going to fund, right? I think a lot of people would say, I don't want to make that decision. I don't want to be the one responsible for choosing between an economic benefit and a social benefit, right? But if we change it up a little bit and we say, what if I made you choose once an hour or once a minute for an hour? Okay, you get to choose 60 times. Now people start to get a little more comfortable with the idea of like, okay, well, for fairness, for parity, maybe I'll go with the economic benefit 50% of the time and the social benefit 50% of the time. Or they'll play around with those two ratios, right? But the idea is that you can start to get an idea about which one of those two values is more important. Not to the point of excluding the other one, but which one of those is your primary. So what I want to do now is turn you back to your papers where you've listed out these improvements. And I want to ask you to assign a value, the primary value reflected in this improvement. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes. Go back to these improvements. And by the way, if you come up with more improvements, if there are other things that you think, oh, well, this would be a good idea too, I didn't think of it earlier, write that one in. All I ask is that you then assign, is this primarily a social benefit or an economic benefit? Okay? I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. Go. It's amazing how fast time goes when you're discussing fun stuff like mass transit. I actually gave everybody an extra minute because I saw both of them. 2 more hours, right. Yeah. So, I will tell you, we'll see. I will tell you that is usually everybody's least favorite part of this sort of an exercise. Group in the back, come back. I need you back. See, that's why that's happening. So I tell you, that's usually people's least favorite part of this exercise, or an exercise like this, because it really is that difficult to pull the two values apart and to say which one is the deciding factor in these objectives, right? Nevertheless, I'm going to go through these. There's only 6 of them, so it shouldn't take too long. I'm going to go through these, and I want your group to tell me, what did you decide? Was it an economic or a social? Primarily, not exclusively. So, frequency, that was this group here.
Well, I think we have the good fortune of having so many that were similar, as you alluded to the first time. So we were coming down on the side of economic.
Economic, okay. I'm just going to put an E there. Or I could draw a money sign, but I don't know what I put for social. Anyway, keeping a schedule. Somebody said something about it was important for the schedule to be followed. Didn't they? I know I didn't make that up.
Yeah, that's economic huge because you've got to get someplace. It's time, and time is money.
Okay, all right, I'm going to put economic there. Okay. Extended hours. Talked about extended hours.
That's definitely economic.
Definitely, okay, and again, I want to acknowledge it's not exclusively economic, it's primarily economic. Or maybe the reason that we're very concerned about it is economic. Okay, all right. Integration with city services like traffic lights or reserved lanes for buses, I think that's what you guys were saying. This is a group in the back again, right?
Like a cutout form when they stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, for example, thinking on the people with wheelchairs or some other fixtures that they have to carry. For example, if the bus stopped in the middle of the
Yeah, in the middle of the road, that can be kind of a problem, right?
you have some place that they can park, a small venue that they can park, or people can actually leave their car and take the bus. That can even
Sure, sure. So would you say that's an economic or a social value? Primarily. Well, they're all both. Okay, I'll put that one there. All right. More service area. We talked about this really briefly. So buses reaching areas that are currently not being served. Is that more of an economic or more of a social value? Social. Primarily, okay, I heard social and economic.
I can be social.
I was saying social because it might help connect some areas that formerly couldn't get to other places, or
How about this? Would you agree that it was more social if we're saying if the determination of more service area, the areas that are added, are not based on where there's activity, we're just covering more area? So we're not trying to serve new employment centers, we're not trying to serve new shopping centers, we're just trying to get them into neighborhoods, right? So if we looked at it that way, then social. Okay. And I really want to have at least one social up here. Right? What about the mobile app? I thought, which by the way, brilliant. That's a brilliant idea. Who said mobile app? Group in the back. Economic or social?
It could be more economic because if you are, for example, running late in your job, but the app is telling you, oh, you know what? If you walk just one more block, you will have faster bus because your bus it will take 10 minutes, 15.
Okay.
So that economic. Or if you had doctor appointment and you are already late, oh, you know what? Go to the other block, and that will take you to, for me.
I will put economic.
You could even call a taxi, but if you could see on your app that the bus you wanted was 1 minute away.
Yeah. So just wait the 1 minute, right? Yeah. I will tell you, information helps customers make informed decisions, right? That's great. It's definitely good social, good customer service. Anyway, so draw your attention back to these, which again are what you guys made, and I want to draw your attention to the pattern that emerged here, which is that primarily you guys are looking at, not exclusively, but primarily an economic incentive. Let me pose a question, and nobody has to volunteer themselves, but is there anybody in the room who has very strong feelings about the potential for a very good mass transit system to have a very positive impact on the economy? Okay. Does anybody disagree with that statement? Okay. So, all right, well, it's great that we have all these. So we've aligned, we've pulled out some values out of these objectives. let's talk about the next part, which is how do you pay for it, right? Nothing's free. 10 Staffel, everybody heard this? There's no such thing as a free lunch. Actually, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. But anyway, in not necessarily just government, but generally in life, you have an established program and you want to change it. Well, if you want to change it, there's two ways you can do that. You can either add money to the system, or you can cut something that you're already doing and replace that money put that money into another program, right? So on the scale of a transit system, there's two ways to pay for these sorts of things. We can cut something of equal value, or we can ask for more money. We're going to address both of those, but I want to start with cutting, right? Because generally speaking, it's much faster. It's much faster. You get a much faster change because asking for more money is very difficult. It's very difficult to get more money out of the government, especially for an issue which you have to admit is primarily looked at. It's funny to me because looking at this from the outside, when I hear people talk about mass transit, I often hear it characterized as a social good. But what it sounds like is a lot of you see it as an economic good. So that's interesting to me. But anyway, let's look at the idea of cutting an existing service. So it would take a long time for us to really get into the nitty-gritty of all this and take apart the budgets and all that kind of stuff. So here's what I want each group to do. Pick one of the improvements that you picked on, that you chose, and see if you can't think of something of equal value in the transit system, not from another department, inside the transit system, that you would eliminate to pay for that improvement. Okay? I'm only going to give you 3 minutes on this because I don't want to say I already know what the answer is, but I suspect it's going to be a contentious issue. All right? So 3 minutes on the clock. Go. So, team in the back, what are your thoughts? Did you pick, first of all, which improvement did you pick, if either, if any? Did you pick an improvement?
The mobile app.
The mobile app, okay. And what did you pick as far as a cut to pay for it?
We practically left the city employee with 100 people. We
Okay.
fired everybody.
All right.
We also talked
Okay.
about,
So,
We saved a lot of money there.
sure.
Including some commissioners.
we also wanted to cut some of our road projects that we are connecting with South Carolina until we can get out.
Okay, all right. I have never worked for a municipal government before. I've worked for the federal government before, and my experience has been that it gets really tricky when you try to move money from one department to another. But let me switch to the other group really quickly. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Were you able to find something to pay for any of your improvements as far as cutting a service to pay for another service?
Well, great idea that was floated was to go almost exclusively the electronic app. APT currently prints maps, just go all electronic.
Okay. All right.
So at least realize the savings.
Sure. And
And
as someone who's
ability
printing
to
stuff
the
today,
print becomes dated the moment it's off the press, just with that.
that's true.
Couldn't we do that with a few less administrators on?
Ouch. All right now. Okay. All right. So I want to draw your attention to something though, because this is really important, and this is something that often gets left out of conversations when we talk about not just transit, but any facet of the government, any facet of public service, which is that when we make a demand, when we make a suggestion for an improvement, it's a good idea to have an understanding that it's going to cost something, right? Very few people are in a position to just allocate more money. But that being said, you can get more money if you follow a couple of very specific rules. The way to get more money comes back to what I said at the beginning, which is finding a criteria, right? Finding a criteria so that you can measure where you are today and then say where you want to be, and then, and this is the key part, linking that improvement to a specific action, right? Then you can get the money to carry out that action, assuming you've got your criteria aligned, okay? So let me ask you this. What measurement would indicate better service? So what we need to do now is, keeping in mind these are the improvements that we're talking about, what criteria could we use that align with the values here, right, to talk about improving the system? So I think I've got a slide in here that's got a couple of suggestions. And I guess I kind of skipped over this idea, but when you prioritize, when you decide we're going to do this one instead of this one, or we're going to do this one first, what you're saying is, this is what we value the most, okay? So I want to draw your attention to the values that you outlined in your suggestions, in your recommendations. The values that you outlined were primarily economic, okay? And that's not to say that the social value isn't important as well, just that it wasn't the one that everyone in the room kind of leaned towards as being the driving factor, okay? So, with that being said, what kind of measurements can we use to look at the economic impact of these improvements? So, measurements in transit, there's a lot that get generated. There's UPTs, which are unconnected passenger trips, right? So that's measuring how many people got on the bus. We can measure the subsidy of every ride by dividing how much money we spend on the buses with how many rides it provides, right? We can measure social utility by looking at how many people in Augusta are within, pick a distance, half a mile of a bus stop, right? And that gets into that more service area, right? By measuring our service area, by measuring how many people have access, we're looking at that social value. So that's a social criteria. One of the criteria that I hear a lot when people discuss mass transit is how many people are on the bus, right? How many people are riding the bus? And it's interesting because that is an economic criteria, right? What we're trying to measure there is how many people are using the service that we're paying for, okay? So just really quickly, and again, this team, huge advantage because they have a technical expert with them. Really quickly, I want you guys to brainstorm a couple of things that we could measure in the bus service to determine whether or not we're achieving our goals. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to give you 4 minutes. Group in the back. Did you come up with a criteria? Did you come up with a criteria that you thought would be a good measurement in economic terms of where we are today, that we could implement one of these solutions and see a difference in that measurement because of that improvement?
Well, we did talk about, again, the mobile app, because it would actually show us how many people are accessing the buses, and on what type of rate, like daily, and from what part of the city they're accessing. So we would be able to actually see how either the use of this app has enhanced the ridership as well as access to areas in our city.
Sure. So people could use the app, and the app could report back to the system to say, hey, somebody on Walton Way and whatever just accessed your app to try to find out when this bus is coming. Ipso facto, service up there is desired. So it might give us a good idea of where the demand is, and then that might give us a good idea of where the service should be, right? Because, again, if we're looking at economic values here, then chances are we should direct the service where the demand is, as opposed to just a blanket even coverage for the city, right? Okay, that's really interesting. I like that. Okay, cool. Group in the front, did you come up with any criteria that you think would be useful?
Well, standbys, ridership, and what stops are being stopped at most frequently. I think we probably would, we have to take a look at the services, looking at those regular users, or your clients, so to speak, improving the services, and then I'm not sure if it's a logical step then, as you look at the bottom line, to look at possible expansion. Is that a logical look at what do you think?
Yeah, those are definitely ingredients of all.
So ridership is like the classic measurement of, is this transit system worthwhile? People are always saying this. Is the bus full? Is the tram full? Is the train full? Is the ferry full? Right? They're always looking at those numbers. And it is an economic measurement, right? It's not a measurement of the social good that's provided. It's a measurement of the economic good. And also the economic cost, right? So, one of the values that wasn't put up here, but was talked about, I think, there in the back group, is there's this idea that, to an extent, public transit is a public subsidy, right? We all pitch in with our tax money, pays for this. If we're giving a certain amount to the transit system, then the more riders there are, the more ridership, the smaller the subsidy per ride, right? So by increasing the ridership, we still all pay the same amount, but we pay less per ride. So, and again, that's an economic value. I want to come back to that mobile app idea. That's really cool.
I wanted to add, and it would also, in coming back to the department there, show them if they were considering increasing service areas where some of the interested riders would be, because by introducing that through the social media, it will actually be accessible to even those, if the bus isn't coming over there, they still might want to see, well, where is it coming? And that'll show, if it's a lot of people over here in West Augusta that's looking for a bus, then transit can say, hey, maybe we can run it a little further down Washington Road. Sure. And it will actually add value to the social aspect as well, because again, you get to see.
Sure. Just a side note, this is a little piece of trivia, but I guess relevant. There's an article recently about Greenville. I work in economic development. Not a week goes by that someone doesn't compare Augusta to Greenville for me, which is always a pleasure. And one of those people recently sent me an article about the system in Greenville. They have a group. I'm really sorry that she left. Grace was here earlier. She works over at the Clubhouse, which is sort of a incubator / tech haven for people that like programming and all that kind of fun stuff. They have something similar in Greenville, and the folks at that one in Greenville, I don't know if they were asked to do this by the city or what, but they made that mobile app for the system in Greenville. So it turned into this sort of like community project where, just a bunch of guys who like to write programming, who like to write code on Friday nights for some reason, they did that, and they gave it to the city. So it would be really interesting to see if the people over here could be inspired to do the same thing, get a little of that competitive nature that Americans are so famous for. Anyway, believe it or not, it's been an hour. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank you especially for your participation. I want to give the opportunity, if he's interested, to a technical expert who was kind enough to join us this evening, Mr. Patrick Stevens, who is in fact the director of your public transportation system. So, Mr. Stevens.
First of all, Jack, I want to thank you for inviting me over. And I realize we're right here at 7 o'clock or so, but if you guys want to indulge with me for just about 5 minutes, I'll go as quick as I can. 8.5 months ago, I was asked to come to the city of Augusta. And I had retired retirement life didn't work for me, couldn't stand it. And I got the opportunity to come down because those folks that hired me said, we would like to have a transport expert help us to improve transit in Augusta. And I got to tell you, I am absolutely grateful that I took that job. But let's talk about public transit. When we talk about what public transit means, when you ask individuals, to one person, it may be to go and do shopping. To another, it may be to go see their grandchildren. To some, it may be to get to school. And to others, it may be to get to jobs. But you know, what about those that don't use transit? You may hear them say, hey, it's not a service I use. But I'm going to offer you something to think about. Transit is more than just the convenience of getting people to where they want to go. It's an important part of your community infrastructure. And let me use an example. We have seen the unfortunate tragedies that have affected many cities around the United States, be it hurricanes, be it natural weather phenomena, other like tornadoes. It could be gas leaks, etc., where people who don't normally use public transit are separated from their vehicles. And I guarantee you look at those newscasts that are out there, and where there's public transit, you'll see public transit there helping to evacuate that community. That's an important part of our mission. When you look at cities like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, and many of those other places, they were small cities, just like Augusta was a long time ago. And somebody had an idea, and they decided transit's an important part of our infrastructure. You know, many times when a business looks at relocating to town, they will ask, do you have a transit system to get my people to work? And if the answer is no, sometimes those employers make a decision to relocate elsewhere. Well, public transit is not just a local government initiative. It takes everybody in the community to make public transit work. It's our business executives, it's our community leaders, it's our elected officials. And it's working together to create a plan to make transit relevant and viable in a community. So, where does that leave us after 8.5 months? Like I said, I'm absolutely excited to have been selected as a transit director down here, and I'm equally excited about the fact that the elected leaders of this community have expressed a great deal of interest in moving things forward. Well, what's our next steps? I will tell you that within a short time, we are going to conduct what we call a comprehensive analysis of the transit system in this community. One thing we do not want to do is just arbitrarily say, well, we're going to extend service to late at night. We're going to take and increase the frequency. We're going to add this, we're going to add that. Because how many times do you know when you just, if you will, shoot from the hip, make an arbitrary decision, you end up wasting money. So you have to understand, as Jack was alluding to earlier, you need to understand all this data, what's there. So, we're getting ready to embark on doing a comprehensive analysis of the system. And I'm going to just throw a few questions out that I made notes of. What we we want to know is out of our existing route structure that we're currently operating, are there any fundamental changes in that structure that are appropriate to meet the changing needs of our region, you know, the community? Can we realign that within our existing budget to make it work better? Are there other service delivery methods that we could use that may improve our service? We want to look at our downtown area. I've seen the community, they want to make the downtown region more vibrant and stuff, so we want to look at what downtown route structure will support our growing service levels and accommodate any major system changes. We want to look at things such as what are the general service parameters, span of service, the frequency, what levels of those are appropriate for a growing region of our size. I heard a while ago about that app. I'm just going to tell you right now, stay tuned. Okay? But here's another question. What technology investments are appropriate for the long term, such as our fare box upgrade, real-time information, traffic signal priority, etc.? And then lastly, we've got to look at what's the appropriate revenue mix and fare structure for the system. Let me just mention a couple of things that's there. Often the expectations are that the government provide everything related to public transit. Keep in mind, the government could be the catalyst. But we also have to have our riders pay their fair share of the system. And that combined with some of the government grants that we're getting, etc., and our ability to expand service and pay for the cost of the service, get more riders on there, we're going to have to do this incrementally. We just can't throw it all out there at once. The money does not exist to do that. So, in closing, let me share with you some of the things I can share with you that are about to happen. We recently ordered 3 brand new buses, okay? I'm still waiting on the final time frame, but those buses we're expecting probably the end of this year, the first part of next year. For the first time, the city of Augusta, at least that I know, is going to have 40-foot buses. Right now we're running 30 and 35. And I would say to those folks that argue that bigger buses are not cost effective, well, and they say because they see buses running around empty. Earlier we heard about peak buses. Most of the time your ridership happens in the mornings and the evening. People going to work, going home to work, people going to school, people going to shopping, wherever it needs to be. And often you have a little bit of a lull during the middle of the day. If we use small buses out there, what do you think would happen in the morning and the evening? We would be passing people up because we don't have it, and I will tell you, we've got a couple of situations right now on our existing routes where we're passing people up. So we've got those 3 new big buses in. By midsummer time, we're expecting about 8 new paratransit, the smaller vehicles that are in there. I think that with this study, there's a few other surprises that I think are going to happen, and I'll share that later. But what's important to remember is that the community is absolutely important in improving transit. And Jack, I'm thankful for your forum this way. When we do that study, we're going to get more and more people together. Once that we have this data, government, the elected officials, community leaders, we're going to be able to come back and say, now we know what we know, and the real question is as a community, what do we want our system to look like in the future? Once we make that decision, then we're going to be able to put together the goals of how we're going to get there. But I stayed at a pretty high level, but that will share some information with you. I've got 3 members that I see right here that sit on our Community Advisory Council down there. And they can tell you they've seen some improvements, and we're steadily working that way. But I need this community, the elected leaders need this community, for all of us to work together and develop a positive attitude towards transit. And as we all work together, quite frankly, we're going to leave a legacy for those that follow, because Augusta and everybody else, when Augusta grows to like Los Angeles and them, some people say, nah, it ain't going to happen. And the others didn't think so. The community of today will be able to say, hey, we thought ahead. So, Jack, again, I thank you for inviting me over, and stay tuned. Like I say, this has been a wonderful and a job rewarding experience, but I'm looking forward to assisting in whatever I can to make transit better in this community.
All right, so that was our forum. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.